Welcome to another episode of the Legacy in Action podcast. Today we dive deeper into the first pillar of building legacy in action, personal stewardship. To bring legacy to life, please welcome our speaker, Jonathan Ramos, author of Legacy in Action.
Welcome back to the Legacy in Action podcast. I'm Jonathan Ramos, author of the Legacy in Action. And today we begin the first pillar of the Legacy in Action movement, personal stewardship. As you know, every great legacy begins here with self. Before we can lead families, manage enterprises, or influence communities, we must learn to lead the hardest person to lead, ourselves. Understanding stewardship at the personal dimension level is actually not easy. But let me start with a story that shaped the whole foundation of my book, Legacy in Action. Every dawn at 3 a.m., before the city stirred, Mama would knock on my door, her voice calm but firm. "John, time to open the store." I'm half asleep, and I'd follow her through the dark streets of Carbon Market, the smell of rice and fresh eggs filling the morning air. While other kids dreamed, I was arranging trays of eggs, scoping corn grits, and weighing rice for the early buyers. At first, it felt like duty, but later I realized it was discipline. In those quiet hours, I wasn't just helping Mama, I was learning stewardship. That we may not own much, but what we have, the time, the energy, and purpose, we must manage with care. Because before we can lead others, we must learn to lead ourselves. That scene, which I wrote about in chapter 1 and 2 of Legacy in Action, taught me that stewardship is not about ownership. It's about responsibility. We didn't own much, but what we had was the time, the energy, the hope that we need to manage with care. And that, for me, is personal stewardship. The discipline to govern and lead oneself with integrity, clarity, and resilience. Because before we can lead others, we must learn how to lead our inner self. And it's about managing the private world no one sees, so that our public influence remains credible. And so let's move to the 3 M's of leadership. You see, in my 30 years of journey, from that young vendor to a CEO, consultant, and a now author, I've learned that personal stewardship thrives through 3 foundations, and I call that 3 M's. First is a mindset. This is actually leading from within. Second is mastery, leading through discipline. And the third one, my favorite, the mission. And it's actually leading for continuity. 3, determine whether leadership will last one season or one's lifetime. Let's begin with mindset as our M1, leading from within. So in chapter 2, in my Legacy in Action book, you will find there the learning to hustle. And I wrote about my mornings as a 14-year-old vendor in Cebu's public market called Carbon Market. And I didn't know it then, but those mornings were forming my mindset, showing me that hard work wasn't just survival. It was stewardship. Clarity begins in conviction. And I believe in this because our mindset shapes our response to adversity, success, and uncertainty. And when we see leadership as a responsibility and not privilege, we act differently. I couldn't control the weather or the buyer's moods. But you know what? I could control my attitude. And that shift from I have to I get to built that foundation for every decision that followed. Clarity begins in conviction. So here, I'd like to introduce how we can practice this concept. First is that maybe if you have pen and paper with you, you can write your 10-word identity statement. Like, I am a who that serves or builds or creates by doing what? For example, mine began as simple as I am a steward leader who unites families in business. This short line became my compass actually, especially when pressure or distraction tried to pull me off course. Now on M2, the mastery, it's about leading through discipline. So if mindset sets the ceiling, mastery raises the floor. And that's what I learned when I built Premier Family Business Consulting about 15 years ago. There were seasons I was exhausted, uncertain, even tempted to quit. But one pattern kept me grounded: discipline. Not perfection, but rhythm. Not speed, but steadiness. In fact, in Legacy in Action, I wrote there, success without discipline fades fast. And stewardship without rhythm, guess what? Breaks easily. So I began practicing what I now teach. Pause, process, and proceed. What is it? Pause, process, proceed. So before reacting, pause, take a breath, and then process. Like ask yourself, what would my purpose do? And then proceed. You act, but not react. That habit, that one breath, one question, one choice, turned chaos into calm. Because remember this, you can't lead what you can't manage within yourself. And so for our M3, mission, leading for continuity. You see, mission is where conviction and discipline finally take direction. Mission transforms purpose into legacy and continuity. It reminds us that leadership is not what we leave behind, but is what we set in motion. So in chapter 6, entitled Rising from the Ashes, I wrote about a moment when everything I built, my business, my security, my confidence, guess what? Crumbled. Yeah, you heard me right. Crumbled. And yet, amid that loss, I found what couldn't be destroyed: my mission. One night, while praying in silence, I wrote a single line: unite families, business, model generational wealth. And today, when you put it all together, it simply means unite family in business as a supreme model for generational wealth. That one sentence revived my spirit and gave birth to the very company and calling I lead today, the Premier Family Business. Which mission reminds us that legacy isn't what we leave behind, it's what we set in motion. So, let's try this. It's about RGR. All right? RGR. It's roles, goals, and rhythm. So how about if you choose one role you play, and then come up with a 90-day goal, and then one weekly rhythm that sustains it. For example, how about your role as a parent? You might want to look at the goal, which maybe is a 12 Sunday dinners in 12 weeks. And then the rhythm can be every Sunday, 6 p.m., you will have a gratitude round. Well, to me, legacy doesn't happen in leaps. It happens in rhythm. I know you will agree with me on that, but let's challenge ourselves. Let's do that. So what is our legacy moves for this? Well, let's make this practical and let's make this week actionable. So first is on the mindset. You can write 10-word identity statement, post it where you can see it. And then second is mastery, right? And so choose one daily discipline like sleep, focus, prayer, or gratitude and honor it for 7 days. And on the mission, you can write your RGR, like one role, one goal, and one rhythm. Why? Because legacy isn't built overnight. It is shaped by consistent, unseen actions done faithfully. Stewardship begins when we take ownership of the self we've been entrusted to lead, right? And so mindset gives clarity, and mastery gives credibility, and mission gives continuity. And it all begins with a person in the mirror. In the mirror. And if these stories inspired you, you can read more in my book, Legacy in Action, especially on chapters 1, 2, and 6, where I share how faith, family, and failure shape the foundations of this first pillar. So join me next episode as we dive deeper into self-governance, how to regulate the emotions, and manage our time and stay composed under pressure. I'm Jonathan Ramos, and this is Legacy in Action.
Thank you, Jonathan Ramos, for inspiring us with how to start building a legacy in action, beginning with personal stewardship. You reminded us that we cannot successfully lead others unless we learn to lead ourselves first. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your family and friends who will benefit from these insights. Until the next episode, live a life that outlives you.